Sexy people, it is Dave, it is Duncan. It's Duncan.
Barry White on the call when we're here.
You're my first. You're my last. My everything.
Oh,
voice is not holding up, lads. I'm hoping I make it to the end of this review. Otherwise, it's going to be very one-sided.
Yeah, otherwise, we won't be able to do the other reviews we're doing tonight and a podcast. Yay.
All going on. Anyway, review time. And for our first review of the night, we are checking out the new album from Hull, Sludge Monsters, Mastiff. The band's new album, Deprecipice, will be released on March 22nd via MNRK Heavy.
MNRK.
Since forming amid the misery of Kingston upon Hull in 2013, the misery, Mastiff have crashed extreme metal, sludge, and hardcore together to create the most brutal sonic onslaughts possible. Vocalist Jim Hodge, guitarist James Andrew Lee and Phil Johnson, bassist Daniel Dolby, and drummer Michael Shepherd write together in the rehearsal room, then record as quickly as they can. All in the name of keeping their music fresh, raw, and seething. Even though they're signed to major label MNRK, MNRK. 3 years ago, Mastiff's commitment to blunt forced aggression remains untempered. Their 2021 album, Leave Me the Ashes of the Earth, was described by Blabbermouth's Dom Lawson as a horrifying slab of disgust and a sustained scream in the face of uncontrollable madness. Now comes along its long-anticipated follow-up, Deprecipice, an album that somehow smacks even harder than anything this band have unchained before. Unlike so many of their extreme metal peers right now, though, Mastiff didn't source this rejuvenated savagery from the anxieties and frustrations of the COVID-19 pandemic. As the lockdowns ended and real life started to resume in 2021 and 2022, Hodge and Lee noticed the spirits of the world around them lifting. Feelings of trauma and isolation were beginning to enter people's rear-view mirrors, and it was an overcoming that the duo couldn't relate to. Lee was mourning the loss of his mother, while Hodge realised that he was still grieving over the death of his 5-day-old son, Isaac, in 2010. The album's called Deprecipice, and that pretty much sums up where me and James were when we wrote it, says the singer. We were both stranded back on the edge of a depressive void. Deprecipice does everything to convey the raw nature of these emotions. Again, the album was recorded by Joe Clayton at No Studio in Manchester in the space of a week to keep everything pure. The album was then mastered by Brad Boatwright.
We love you, Brad.
Swoon. We reviewed the band's last album in 2021, way back.
I can't believe that was 3 years ago.
Yeah.
I had in my head when this came through, I kind of felt like I turned that around pretty quick. Fucking flying at the studio. Yeah. I didn't realise it had been 3 years. So, and I remember remarking on that review that one of the kind of big takeaways from me was how little the band had tried to change their sound in that move towards the bigger record label, because a lot of bands lose a bit of the roughage in the hands of a major record label for obvious reasons, and that one, it sounded bigger, but it didn't sound like they lost anything. So you can imagine my surprise when I switched this bad boy on to hear that this was even heavier.
Yeah, yeah, I was the same. Like, I really dug the kind of the blend of styles they went for on the last release, but I was kind of interested to hear where they would go with this one. But like you say, like regardless of what lane a Mastiff album is going to be in, like one thing for sure, it is going to sound utterly manky, and I mean, it just sounds like my voice basically.
And Dave's tonsils.
And I kind of love that about the band. Like, they are very much like a no fucks given type of band.
Yeah.
It wouldn't matter what label this band were on, you will still get a very unfiltered version of Mastiff on every single release, and that's awesome. I think I think we said on the last review that the last album I think touched a little bit more on the kind of deathy kind of side of things.
There was a smidge of black metal in there, which has been flexed a little bit more on this one, which I quite like.
Yeah. However, if you've listened to any of our reviews, you'll also know that myself, the Dave, is quite a fan of the hardcore Duncan.
I mean, rumour has it, Dave, that hardcore is going through a bit of a renaissance at the moment. So
Hardcore for life, y'all. I've got that
I
tattooed.
like Dave's voice.
across here.
Oh.
I am excited to say that Mastiff also have a fondness for the hardcore. And as such, this album is leaning a wee bit more into that side of things, which makes me hard for life, y'all. This
Get that checked out. I feel like that could be healthy.
this album is a bit more riffy, and that they kind of use those kind of like the sludgy kind of deathy elements. They're still there, and it gives these tracks like that weight and just the girth on the album. But then they've spliced this album with these real like kind of thunderous kind of hardcore sections that for me just make it more or even more Moorish than before. I found that the kind of riffs on this one were more memorable actually than the last album. Everything is Ending, which is track 2 on the album, is a personal favourite of mine on this release.
Utterly punishing.
It really is. That is just an album, a track, sorry, you could just play on repeat. It is absolutely loaded. It's like they've just thought, like, how many amazing riffs can we fit in this song? And it's just groove after groove with breakdowns that it'll just get stuck in your head afterwards. And I think that was something that I didn't realise they needed more of. Like, the last album, Leave Me the Ashes of the Earth, was a great album. We all really enjoyed the album. Weirdly, I didn't really go back to as much as I expected.
Yeah.
However, I've already listened to this 5 times, and I feel like I'm not done rinsing this album yet. I think there's a lot of reward in the re-listens to this. There's a lot of moments and riffs on this that really catch your attention and make you want to go back, even more than the last album did. And I think that kind of memorability continues throughout this album as well. That I feel like their songwriting, their composition on this one seems to be a kind of level up from the last release. It feels more distinctive to me. I felt like the songs on this were more standout. They didn't really there wasn't tracks here that kind of blended into the background. I feel like the detail and the thought that's went into how they transition apart or how they lead into sections felt much more accomplished on this release. Although they've upped the ratio of the hardcore elements on this, it's not everything this album was about. It's still very varied in style, from the more kind of doom and sludge sections on Void, or where they get a bit more fiery on the likes of Skin Stripper, which is loaded with blast beats and these like kind of blackened, kind of punk infused riffs. But it all works really well together. Nothing feels like it's been awkwardly forced in, or not. Just it's there for no apparent reason. It's very well blended. It's all tonally suited as well, and feels really cohesive on this album. I love the additions of the guest vocals on this. We've got Ethan from Primitive Man, who we'll be talking about later on tonight, on Cutthroat, Harry from Burner on Serrated, and Rob from Yersin on Worship. And like they've 100% picked the right guys for the job. Cutthroat is very abrasive and very kind of drone-like, which suits that kind of Primitive Man style. And Serrated is a good mix of kind of almost like Swedish death with a bit of hardcore, and that works really well with Harry from Burner's tone. And I've already declared my love for Yersin on one of our early podcasts this year, so I was really psyched to see Rob from the band delivering his savagery on Worship. And like Savage is the perfect description for that track. I felt like that track, the two tones together were absolutely perfect. It's kind of like it felt like nails down a chalkboard, but in the best possible way, if that makes sense. They just complement each other really well, and it makes that track even more visceral. The end breakdown on that track is just, that's like a chef's kiss moment on the album. It then leads into Pitiful, which kind of opens in a kind of similar fashion. It's really big, kind of colossal groove riff. So I thought the kind of pairing of those two tracks together were really well done. As you would expect, the production on this album is fantastic. Joe Clayton and Brad Boatwright. They've kept a lot of the kind of Mastiff kind of sound on this one, so it sits very well with our back catalogue. I'd say there are some subtle differences on this that I think are better than the last one. I felt like the guitars for me were much more defined. Still corrosive and very dense, but I felt like they were kind of tightened up a little bit, which it had a little bit more kind of detail in them, which I liked. And it might be more because they've kind of shifted ever so slightly into a more kind of hardcore territory that they've tweaked it a bit, but it sounds ace regardless. Same with the drums. I much prefer the drum sounds on this one. The snares got a bit more kind of snap to it. And I felt like the bass drums had a bit more kind of punch as well, which just makes the tracks land even better. Yeah, this is even more of a Dave album than the last one, to be honest. Stylistically right up my street. And as a worshipper of the riff, this one entertains me in all the right places. What about yourself? What did you make of this one?
Yeah, so the previous album really worked for me in a lot of levels. If my memory serves, I think I gave it a 4. And I think my comments were, it was like to date was my favourite thing the band had put out.
Yeah.
I had felt like this was a good move in the right direction and felt like had compromised anything of their songwriting or their style to make their major label debut. And I was very curious to see where the band were going to go next, because likelihood would be they'd be out touring bigger venues, bigger bands, and that tends to have an impact on your songwriting. There's confidence that comes with that. And I don't want to say I called it, but this one feels once again like a big move up. Like, on a couple of different fronts. The first one being the songwriting overall. I think the composition and elements they're using now are a much more of a focused, precisional execution. I feel like when you listen to this, everything makes sense. It's not all kind of hopelessly expected, but at the same time, there are moments on this where even when you're like, right, you need to like this track's going to slow down here, it's going to break down. When it hits, you're still like, fuck's sake, because just the heaviness that comes with it. I'd made comments on that previous review that I actually really dug a lot of the kind of blackened elements, and it sounded like they were kind of experimenting with that, and they're here on this one. Kind of specifically in the vocal execution, there's a tone in there that just works for me really, really well when executing that stuff. But furthermore, the sections where the bass isn't, and we're going to talk about the bass, by the way, the bass guitar isn't so low and everything moves up a register and just goes fast. You get those blackened screeches without, once again, losing anything in the production, which you're like, oh, you just want to sound like a black metal band. The bass production, the guitars, right? Yeah, there's loads of character in the guitars. Yes, the drums are better produced. The bass for me is where things have kind of, like, they utilise the bass more for the heavier elements than they did on any of their previous releases. The tone on that is fucking ill. It reminds me, there's something very Scandinavian about the bass tone. It has a precision and a heaviness and a weightiness. There are sections where, like, the bass will just come in under the guitars and you feel like someone is, like, passing you bags of cement. And you, just one more, and you're like, I can't take it, like, just another one. It's that fucking heavy, and the production on it is just so defined that it's like kind of a kind of oxymoronic precisional sludge. It shouldn't work with the fuzz that it has. The hardcore element that you've mentioned is more prominent, and there is a punky attitude. And what I kind of love about what Mastiff have done is, I get a feeling that every time I listen to their albums, I get to know the band more. Like, I get to know more of their influences, how they feel about things. And they're just very, very good at kind of co-opting sounds and styles and making it sound Mastiff, as opposed to bringing in elements for the sake of bringing in elements or trying stuff out. It always kind of feels like they're sitting on this reserve of influences and styles, and you know they're kind of just being like, oh well, remember that time we wrote that riff, that'll go really good there. The structure of the album is really, really, really good. They save most of the guest vocals for the middle of the album. And like you mentioned before, the tracks that they utilize those guest vocals on make sense, as opposed to some bands that are in the, you know, we've listened to some recently in the death metal genre where they're like, oh, here's all our friends. And it's like, you could have just done that yourself. There isn't any great reason why this vocalist is on here. You mentioned before when you listen to Void has a bit more of a kind of expansive sort of feel to it, so as a result that makes sense. When you listen to Serrated, that makes sense. Worship makes sense. Like the choice of them are that they have brought something to the mix that vocal styling over the top would work really well on, so that's smart play. It's also in the middle part of the album as well, so you're not kind of closing out with loads of guest vocals or starting with loads of guest vocals. You've got the band's personality over a few tracks, either side kind of almost bookending it. Everything is Ending is maybe the best thing I've heard Mastiff do in terms of heavy, brutal, uncompromising, but like the chorus has that kind of hardcore element that makes you want to shout with them. It's so bleak sounding, but so Moorish. I love Cutthroat. Cutthroat to me is the band experimenting with kind of quasi-industrial tones. There's something very industrial about that track to the almost kind of monosyllabic drum playing, which could be replicated by a computer, but they've chose to do it live. And that those kind of weird discordant tones that play through, and then this hellacious vocal that just sits carrying the track through. It's perfectly placed. It breaks up the album. By the time Skin Stripper comes back in, you're like, holy shit, we need to pick up the pace, and that picks up the pace for you. This is a shining example of a band that continue to raise their game without at 1 second even thinking about compromising their sound. If you're a Mastiff fan, there's absolutely no way that you're going to be disappointed by this. And I kind of think at this stage, we shouldn't ever doubt the band's growth.
Yep.
I think this is Mastiff doing the thing that makes sense to them. And to be honest, if I'm a record label signing this band, that's kind of what I want from them.
Yeah.
I don't want them to kind of polish off some of those rough edges. I don't really want them to compromise those things. I want them to keep elevating their game. And this is the best thing. I feel like a broken record. This is the best thing the band has done to date. Production is incredible. Brad once again coming in, just making things all tight. It just sounds like the kind of mix and mastering and the delivery of this. It's fucking great. I'm incredibly excited for the band to once again get out on tour. Hopefully we'll get a chance to see them live. And they're doing Satan's work. I was going to say God, and I was like, reverse it. I love it. The other thing I'll say is we occasionally touch on these things, but not often. Album artwork for this, I fucking adore. It's kind of like a guy, depending on your perspective, it's either a guy kind of falling into a chasm, or it's a guy falling into the ocean. One of the two. And if you flip upside down, it still works. It's kind of works forwards as backwards, as above, so below. So it's fucking great.
Nice. Okay. Final thing is scores for the new album from Mastiff. I think you hit the nail on the head there. This is a prime example of growth. This is a band that are continuing to get better. They are clearly thinking about what would make that next release even better than the last one. What can we do? What can we change? And I love the fact that they've thrown another slant on this one and added in some different elements. In my opinion, I think it's superior to the last album. I scored the last one a 4. I'm going to go higher on this one. I'm going to go a 4.5 on this one from Mastiff. What about yourself?
I think I'm in the same boat as you. I'm almost certain that I scored it a 4.
Yeah.
And this one to me isn't their 5-star album, but I think we're an album out. I think the next album could very, very easily be a kind of benchmark that kind of UK sludge metal is going to be held up to for the next decade. I think they're that fucking good. So yeah, 4.5 from me.
Nice. Deprecipice is out on March 22nd on MNRK Heavy. Links below to the band, to the pre-order. Check it out. Mastiff, just keep doing what you're doing. Can't wait to hear what you guys do next. And hopefully, as Duncan said, we might get out to see you in Glasgow or Edinburgh later this month. That is the review. Thanks for checking out. We'll be back with another review very soon. But until then, take care. Speak to you soon.
Bye, everyone.